I would talk with Marine veteran Eric Lazar, who is with SpeedPro Chicago Loop, which is a great big graphics company. Eric, welcome to the show. Look forward to hearing your story. Before we do all that, take us back and tell us what you did in the Marine Corps.
Well, Joe, thank you for having me. I went into the Marine Corps in 1986. Right out of high school, I enlisted, and I went in as an intelligence analyst. First, went to the Defense Language Institute at Monterey to study Arabic. Was there for about a year. An opportunity came up to move over to more traditional intelligence, and I took that opportunity and went to Dam Neck, Virginia. And most of my time was spent in two units. I was first with 3rd Combat Engineer Battalion in Okinawa, Japan. And then I spent the last 3 years with VMAQ2, which is an electronic warfare squadron based out of Cherry Point, where I had a couple of Westpac deployments.
Awesome. So talk about your transition coming out of the Marine Corps. Were you ready for it, prepared? Was it a surprise?
No, I was ready for it. Certainly had the opportunity to stay in. I had considered going, looking at officer programs, but I did need to go get my college education. So I had planned for that. And when I got out, I moved back home, went to Stony Brook University, and really at that point, because I was 23 years old, the college experience wasn't going to be the same as an 18-year-old. I was just looking to finish up quickly and knock that out in 3 years to get into the private sector. But actually, I went back into the Marine Corps for about 6 months following college. The transition was a little bit difficult, and just sort of trying to find my way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always funny to hear those stories about veterans going to college. There's some guy started a website or social media called Ranger Goes to College. His experience of being much more mature and worldly in the early mid-20s versus all the 18-year-old kids. So it can always be a clash of cultures.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So ultimately got out of the Marine Corps again and headed out into the civilian sector. So talk about some of what your civilian career was like beyond that.
It was challenging. I won't lie. I moved from out of New York to DC. I had a couple of friends from school that moved down there. I always liked DC. I had an opportunity to go there a couple of times while I was in the service, and I had really saw myself going into government service. My dream job at that point was to go be a spook. Wanted to work for the CIA, the DIA, the NSA. That didn't pan out. Started looking at some of the consulting firms like Booz Allen. But I didn't really have the credentials at that point. Coming out as a sergeant, as an intel analyst, competing against lieutenant colonels and colonels for jobs at Booz Allen, really, that wasn't going to be in the cards, and I wasn't competitive. So it was a bit of a challenge. In my first private sector job, I got fired in 3 months. It was time. I didn't, I didn't have the skills to necessarily communicate in the civilian or private sector. I hadn't honed those yet, and I was still operating in a military mindset.
Interesting. And so coming off getting fired, how'd you recover from that?
Well, they say those who can do and those who can't teach. I started my first job was with a company, attempt to hire company, a personnel placement company. I did learn a few things there in just that short amount of time, and I certainly had a lot of experience writing resumes for myself. And I thought, okay, maybe I can make a business of this, doing it for other people. So I started a resume writing business, job search business. Did that for it was probably about 18 months, and struggled in really a barely survivable wage until I found my found my way into another opportunity, and broke into television at that point.
Yeah. And so you started to get into marketing and advertising and sales.
I did, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what were some of those jobs that you held going through that process, and what was the learning curve like for you?
So the first job was with a local cable news company down in DC, and had great success. I found my calling. Was there for actually a very short period of time. One of the managers there had left and gone to a larger TV, TV station, and took me with him. So it was, and when I was there, I had also a lot of great success. After about a year and change down in DC working in television, wanted to go back to New York, wasn't really happy in DC. And one of the managers at the TV station that I was working at in DC made a couple of calls to New York, her contacts up there, and I found myself working in the broadcast industry up in New York. And from there, got recruited by a client here in Chicago after a very short period of time to come out as their national sales manager, which was absolutely phenomenal. I had 2 years experience in the broadcast industry, maybe not a little bit longer than that. And I found myself in a management gig in a number 3 market for a major TV station.
That's awesome. And what were most of your duties involved in that? Were you selling radio advertising, or what were you?
Yeah, it was selling, selling and negotiating TV advertising time.
Huh. Interesting.
Either representing actually working for the station directly, or representing TV stations for national sales and across the country.
Okay. All right, back talking with Marine veteran Eric Lazar with SpeedPro Chicago Loop. So, Eric, so you had a pretty good job in the television radio business. Things are going well, but you ended up leaving all that and looking into this entrepreneurship thing. Where did all that come from?
So in 2008, I found myself working in television. I had, the business was really moving from the traditional, what they call spots and dots, just selling advertising, with there were a lot more digital overlays being introduced into the industry. And I didn't have the digital experience. What I realized is that I was going to be a relic. I was going to be a dinosaur. And I had some exposure to digital through my time in television. But I think I always had that entrepreneurial spirit. I certainly, from the resume business, as tough as it was, I did like working for myself. So what I decided in 2008 was to start a business in mobile technology, mobile marketing. That was my first business. That was actually a great success. The business was, I would say, absorbed or acquired about a year later. The business that acquired me, a very small company. We built that over the course of a couple of years. That company was sold. The company that we sold to was then sold again. And I found myself in 2015, the final acquisition was by a private equity company. And, I was basically given a year to find my way out. They were closing down that aspect, or the way we had the mobile division set up. And I needed to go find a new career. And with that year to sort of figure it out, I went and started investigating businesses to buy, and I found my way to SpeedPro.
So tell us about your experience with SpeedPro. SpeedPro is actually a franchise that you bought, franchise rights there in the Chicago area. So this was the first time that you had gone into a franchise?
Yes, this is my first experience with the franchise. I had, during that transitional year, I basically contracted with a couple of business brokers to find either existing businesses or franchises. And through that, the only commonality that all of them had was printing, which just seems so incredibly odd, because you don't typically go from working in television and mobile technology and some of these really sexy things to going into printing. But I was like, okay, I've got to investigate this. So I did a deeper dive, looked at several printing franchises, several printing businesses. And after all that due diligence, it was really SpeedPro that resonated for me.
And why is that? What were some of the things you were looking at and liked about it?
One, I think coming from a military background is the idea of a franchise is that there are certain standard operating procedures. There is a structure to it that was very familiar, that I didn't have to figure out everything myself. So the franchise appealed to me. I think one of the special things about SpeedPro was it wasn't overbearing you know, in terms of that structure, is because I had so much time in the private sector. I had learned to think in a different way, in a more creative way than might normally be attributed to time in the military. So it would give me that flexibility and freedom to apply my own voice and my own approach, which was very dissimilar from a lot of the other franchises that I had considered.
Yeah, sometimes a franchise can be really nice for especially someone who doesn't have a lot of experience in the business world or just coming out of the military. They're used to dealing with a structured system, but they also want to be making their, calling their own shots, making their own calls. And so uh, franchising can be a very good opportunity for many veterans that want to get in the entrepreneurship game, but maybe not have an idea or a business idea to start with. They can try to find one of those franchises that works for them.
100% is I think that's what was very appealing. Certainly I had never, I never owned a business that was of this magnitude. Going into the printing business, there's a very big investment, and having the benefit of an experienced leadership team in terms of the franchisor, and then also the benefit of a lot of experience within the franchise system, other owners that rely on to give you the insights to help direct you from their lessons, from their experience, from their ups and downs, was hugely beneficial.
So talk a little bit specifically about SpeedPro. What exactly do you guys do?
So we're a large format digital graphics provider. So in essence, anything bigger than a business card or a brochure, we're not doing small format, some of the marketing collateral. So banners, banner stands, boards. We do a lot of trade shows, events, window graphics, floor graphics. So really anything, again, larger than a business card or a brochure, that's our space. Vehicle wraps is, also one of the things. So it's a pretty broad array of solutions that we have.
Yeah. I know I was looking at some of the things on your website. It's like really big stuff. You must have some pretty big machines and expensive gear to be able to produce that stuff, especially like a vehicle wrap. Like how many different pieces are involved in how many different pieces of product are involved in a vehicle wrap?
Vehicle wrap is actually relatively simple. It's the
Really?
installation that's complex. Material wise, you're talking about basically the printed vinyl and a laminate, and then a really, really good installer who's not going to screw it up.
Yeah. Yeah, because especially a vehicle, something that's outside and hitting bugs and rocks and stuff all the time may not have the perfect paint job underneath. So, but there's a lot of them that look cool. I remember, like, how many decades ago was it the vehicle wrap started? I remember when we first started seeing those around, it seemed pretty monumental to be able to do that to a vehicle.
Yeah, I'd say probably maybe 20 years ago. I think that's
Yeah.
probably the time before I got into it. Certainly it's much more common now. To see them both, you have the commercial wraps, which are going to be branded, and then you've got a lot of people that are doing their own personal vehicle wraps in terms of just color changes.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about numbers with us. How long you been in your SpeedPro business?
So we started actually April 6th is going to be our 9-year anniversary.
Oh wow. Okay. So can you share some numbers with us, like volume, what it was like your first couple of years, and how much you've grown, or whether it's good, bad, or ugly?
Yeah, you're going to give me a flashback that's probably going to put me in therapy.
Give you some PTSD here.
Yeah, a little bit. It was really tough. Honestly, there are times that I talk about it and it brings tears to my eyes because of how challenging it was. We had a very difficult time getting into our space. We had signed a contract, leased a space. That was the building was a total gut rehab, and we should have been in it within actually 4 months, 5 months of signing that lease. It wound up being close to 2 years.
Oh,
And yeah, we had basically leased equipment. We had hired people. We were getting people trained based on that entry date. And sort of one, I had a commitment to the equipment that I had to pay for, but two, I also had a moral and ethical commitment to the people that I hired based on that. So we never got rid of anybody. My business partner and I, who also came from television, we've known each other for 20 years. We worked out of a coffee shop for a period of 2 years, and
yeah.
it was a super challenging time. So those first couple of years, I mean, we were a sieve. We were losing so much money beyond our initial investment. Our first 4 years, we didn't have a single profitable year. I didn't draw a salary. I had invested basically everything that I had. My entire 401k went into buying the business. And I had left myself enough money thinking it'd be 2 or 3 years, and I there'd be a profit and I'd be able to pull some money. But our first 4 years, we lost, it didn't draw a salary, lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Year 5, we had profitability. But really, our first 7 years, we lost about $450,000.
Mm.
But we always put up good revenue numbers. We just couldn't be profitable. We had accumulated so much debt those first couple of years, and we didn't really have a chance to scale up. We didn't have, as soon as we got into the place, we were already selling at such a volume that the team came in, but they didn't have experience producing. So there were just a lot of mistakes. It was a very, very tough go.
Wow. How were you able to keep going? I mean, 5 years, 7 years, that's tough, man. I guess you had enough civilian experience and money stocked away where you were able to survive financially barely, but like I'm talking like mentally and emotionally, like you must have really believed.
I did believe, but I'm not going to say I didn't doubt myself, and that I
Yeah.
didn't doubt myself very seriously. It was tough. I mean, and we're talking to veterans, and I think there's a stigma against getting help and getting therapy. For me, the VA was super helpful. I did put myself into therapy because it was a terrifying point in my life. I mean, I had just these debilitating panic attacks. I was suffering tremendous amounts of depression. I mean, I had seen all of the wealth that I had accumulated, that I could go into retirement, just literally evaporate within a couple of years. And it was terribly frightening. So it was, yeah, it was a tough go.
Huh. And so where are you at now?
Well, I'm very happy to say, the last 2 years, really coming out of COVID, we've just knocked it out of the park. COVID, we pretty much we hung steady, but it was, we survived it. I'm not going to say it certainly wasn't easy. It was a very, very frightening time. But we came back strong. I think we had the benefit of a couple of years under our belt. People got to know us. I believe that, we did some things in the marketplace which got a lot of positive attention for being a good corporate citizen. That all rolled over just into our reputation. And again, we had a good foundation of being able to build those relationships. So, I never expected anything we weren't going to knock it out of the park in the first couple of years. I always expected it to be tough, and it was going to take a time to get that momentum. And coming out of COVID, it was great. So, the last 2 years, we've had remarkable growth. We've had, the last 2 years, we've had a 105% increase in our revenue.
Yeah.
Our we're trying to think, our gross profit has increased 23% in 2 years. our net margins 20%. So both my business partner and I are taking home salaries that are like what we used to do in the private sector, and we can live life comfortably.
Wow, that's finally
So
made it.
yeah, I feel like we've arrived, and it's not, again, you mentioned PTSD. It's not that I ever take any of it for granted. I always do live with a little bit of fear and apprehension that it could always happen again.
Mhm.
But it's nice to finally take a breath, and it just to go into work with a lighter heart.
Yeah. Uh, so now that you're on the other side, the successful side of things, looking back on it, I always ask people, like, do you consider yourself unemployable? Meaning, like, would you really want to go back to work for other people now that you're successfully working for yourself?
It depends on the day. There are times that I think it would be a lot easier. Is like there's just, having the pressure, having the responsibility
Mhm.
of leading people and caring for people. That is a responsibility. It's a privilege. There are certain times that it's like, I would not like to have that. I would like not to have to make a decision that other people are relying on me for. It's
Mhm.
I think about what my dad had said to me years ago. He was a school principal, and he said when he retires, he just wants to go to a deli and make sandwiches. He didn't want to make another decision again. And sometimes you feel like that, but I think that's a momentary thing. I don't know if I could ever go back and work for somebody again. You do what you have to. Things change, and it's about survival. So sure, I could. Would it be my druthers? I don't think so. I think generally overall, 90% of the time, I'm really excited about the impact that I'm making on my team's life, our clients, that we're
Mhm.
doing things differently, and that's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, and now that you're way down the road with SpeedPro, um, what's your opinion on still working within a franchise? Like, obviously, it was great to start with a franchise because you had that structure and everything. Does that still work well for you?
That's a loaded question. Something I think, quite honestly, is, I think there are people that get to a point when they've gotten to, maybe the point that we're at, 7, 9, 10 years, and they may regret the decision to go with a franchise. Um, but we wouldn't be where we are now had we not had the benefit of a franchise. And I think that's what some people forget. Uh, I know without the support and backing and the knowledge of the franchise, we would have failed. And so the fact that we pay royalties, or anybody pays royalties, down the line,
Hmm.
that's their payoff also. You weren't doing anything really to contribute to them in the early years. And that's the agreement, that's the commitment. So I have no resentment and no regret. Are there times now that I feel like, oh, I could do it on my own without their help? Sure, perhaps. But I think overall, I like the camaraderie of
Yeah,
it. I like learning from my colleagues, and there's huge benefit and value to that. So for me, I've never had a regret about it.
that's great. So if somebody wanted some more information on checking out Speed Pro and their franchise programs, how would they do that?
Um, Welcome to contact me. I'm more than happy to put you in touch with SpeedPro. And people could reach out to me via email. I'm easily found on LinkedIn or Facebook, but my email is Eric, ERIC, Lazar, LAZAR, @speedpro.com.
Great. Well, Eric, I always like to give you the last word if you're talking to those folks getting out of the military, or somebody that just recently got out, or a military spouse that's got the entrepreneur bug, wants to get into business for themselves, run their own show. What kind of advice comes to mind?
I think probably the biggest advice that, maybe the most important advice that I could give is I wouldn't jump into it. And it doesn't really matter if you're you know, a young NCO that's done 4 or 5, 6 year stint, a captain that's done 6 years, a lieutenant colonel or colonel that's done 20 or 22 years. There's a time, it's going to take some time to acclimate to the civilian world. And I think part of that plan, if you want to be an entrepreneur, is to spend some time in the private sector and learn learn the lingo, learn how to relate in that environment. There's just that transition is really important. And, I think the world of entrepreneurship is in itself very difficult, and trying to align that transition from military culture into the civilian culture, that's also that's a big transition as well. And trying to do both of those simultaneously, I don't know if that's necessarily a recipe for success. So I'd say if you want to go be an entrepreneur, take some time, get acclimated, and figure out what's out there. Again, there are a lot of opportunities in the private sector and the civilian world, to prepare yourself for an entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Eric, for sharing your successful entrepreneur story, and look forward to seeing your future success out there.
Joe, thank you very much for the opportunity. Really enjoyed this, and best of success to you as well.
All right, you bet. These two Marines are Oscar Mike.
Take care. Semper Fi.